go. All right, what's up, everybody? Sorry about that. We're still figuring out the intricacies of how to do this, but we're super excited to have everybody on here, and I think we should be live now. Let me see. Yep.
Yep.
All right. Cool. All right, what's up, everybody? Sorry about that. We're still figuring out the intricacies of how to do this, but we're super excited to have everybody on here, and I think we should be live now. All right, we're figuring out one or two audio issues while we do this, but the stream is up, which is a good thing, and we're gonna hopefully try to go live on Facebook too, though. We'll see if that's actually achievable. In the meantime, while people are kind of popping on, say hi in the chat. If you have questions, comments, whatever, just feel free to start throwing them in there. We'd love to see them, and certainly we want to engage, and the whole reason we're doing this is just to hang out with the community, hang out with you guys, and talk about whatever we do on the show, and answer any questions, share some ideas, etc. Let's see.
How's everybody doing tonight? Where are you guys from? Let us know in the chat.
All right, I'm still figuring out the back end of all this stuff. So this is experimental. So we've never done anything quite like this. We did do a Q&A with one of our previous guests, but that was the YouTube has like changed all their settings. And so this is a little bit different. Can everybody hear us okay? I'm trying to see. Let's see. All right. Well, we will continue to soldier on, and hopefully we're getting all the technical stuff squared away. If everything is working now, awesome. If not quite yet, then we can get it working. Austin, can you hear me all right?
I can.
Okay, perfect. And I can hear you. And I think that all of this stuff is being broadcast. It looks like it's working on the stream. And I'm hearing everything too on my test computer next door. So I think we're working. Awesome. Well, where's that sheet of paper that I had created? Oh. So while we're kind of getting booted up, Austin and I have a couple things we're going to kind of just chat about. And then as you have questions, comments, thoughts, etc., just fire them in here. And we will address them and discuss them. So Austin, one of the things that I think would be kind of interesting to discuss is what episodes of the show recently have really been interesting to you or impactful for you, or what shows recently have kind of really resonated with you?
Yeah, I think recently, this is kind of a little teaser for things that are coming up, but Robert Greene was an incredibly good interview. We've been trying to get him for a long time on the show. When I say we've been trying to get him for a long time, I mean like he was on the list when we started the show, and we've just been hammering, working with his people, could never find a time to do it. And, finally had the chance to interview him recently. When did we interview him? I guess it was like last week, but really, really impactful interview. Robert Greene, obviously, is extremely popular for a reason. He's got a lot of great takeaways for the listeners, so be looking out for that. Recently too, this is one that I wasn't sure I was going to love, but ended up loving, was Chase Jarvis. Chase Jarvis is like a little bit off the beaten path of the kind of normal things that normal kind of people we talk about. CEO of Creative Live, obviously a very creative individual, incredible photographer. He's been around forever. And he's got a really cool take on creativity in general. And actually, I started reading his book that he had sent us a few days ago. And it's the idea is that everyone can be creative, right? Like you hear it all the time. People say like, oh, I'm not a creative person. I can't be very creative. But really, creativity, which is something that you touched on today in a speech that you gave, was, it's creativity really is not about all of a sudden, sitting down and writing like this incredible book and being a genius, or like Mozart sitting down and composing a great work. It's really about numbers. It's about putting content out there. It's about being consistent. It's about constantly putting out your thoughts and your creativity and pushing things out there. And then after a certain amount of time, based on just the quantity of content you put out, and then the quality of content obviously goes up as the quantity goes up. I mean, if you keep doing something every day, you push yourself into a new daily practice, you can't help but get better at it. So a lot of people that say like, oh, I can't be a photographer, or oh, I can't like make a short film, or oh, I can't draw, or I can't paint. If you force yourself to kind of develop a daily practice of doing these things, eventually you can't help but get good at it. And sure, you may never be a Mozart, you never may be a Picasso, but you'll get to a point where you can identify as a creative. And I thought that was just super cool. It reminded me of, I'm not sure listeners know, but I'm a huge Casey Neistat fan.
Yeah, Casey's awesome.
He makes some great videos. And one of the things that I remember on his very first vlog was he got on and he was just talking to the camera and he was like, today's my 35th birthday. And I've made a commitment to make one video a day for at least a year. I have no idea where it's going to go, but I'm going to do it. And as someone who literally watched like way more of those videos than I would like to admit, they got a lot better. I mean, at first it was kind of like disheveled, it was really entertaining to watch, but it was just kind of a bunch of like fast clips with like different fast motions and time lapses. But then as it went on, after about a month, after about 2-3 months especially, he started to have sort of like daily messages and stories behind the video. And then he was able to take something as simple as planning his wife's birthday and going to get the balloons for her birthday into like a very compelling story that had everything from like a goal, a setback, another setback, progress, a huge setback, and then ultimately ended with him filling up this room with like 500 balloons for his wife's birthday, which is obviously, awesome. But, he had even been a filmmaker. He had a show on HBO. He had done all these things. So he identified as being creative, but he made it a daily ritual. He sat down and he said he was going to do something for every day for a year, and he became great at it. And from that, he's had like huge campaigns in marketing with Samsung, gotten to go to some of the biggest conferences, getting paid tens of thousands of dollars for an hour-long keynote speech. And it's all because these people who didn't know him before now were exposed to him because every day he was hammering out new content. Every day he was doing things. And so I just think, in my life too, like I don't necessarily consider myself to be someone who's a great drawer, definitely not a great singer, or like, really any sort of like creative. But now after listening to Chase, when I take a picture with my phone, or when I think about like something I might want to post, or even something that I might want to take and just like keep, hang it up on the wall for like me and my family to enjoy, I kind of stop and I think like, what would make this better? Like, how could I make this into something that might be a little more creative? And I never really thought about how I myself could be creative until we kind of sat down with Chase Jarvis. Like I've done random things like writing and stuff like that, but I've just never really, when you look at it through the lens of like a daily regimen, it's something that anyone can do. It just changes the game. It becomes something that's fun, and the imperfection becomes fun, which is a huge part of the whole message. Is like if you always need to be perfect, which perfectionism comes from and stems from the need and the want to be successful because you want to get it right. But if in creative endeavors, especially, if you allow yourself to be paralyzed by perfectionism, you're never going to be able to become creative, because it's like that meme of Steve Jobs, right? It's like all anyone sees, or sorry, not Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos. It's like all anyone sees is he's like this trillionaire owner of Amazon. And then there's that picture of him with like literally a cardboard box that's been like laid out, and it just says like Amazon.com. And he's sitting there with like a 1993 desktop, and like, it looks horrible. But that's like what 99.9% of the people today are doing. And it's what 100% of the people that are going to be in the boardroom making trillions of dollars today are doing right now too. So it's all just about like committing to that practice, not being afraid of being imperfect, but trying to find a way to just continue to hone your craft, continue to do something day to day. And then even if you don't consider yourself to be creative, if you sit down and draw every day, if you sit down and write every day, like Tim Ferriss's 2 shitty pages a day, eventually you'll look back and be like, damn, I got a lot better at this. Maybe I am a little bit creative. So that's one that like really hit hard with me. And then Oscar Trimboli was great too. And I think, who couldn't learn
Well,
how to listen better?
even before we dig into Oscar, like just coming back to something you said about Chase Jarvis, which I think is really important. and Casey Neistat. I mean, one of the things that Casey Neistat talks about, or one of his kind of mantras, is never stop uploading, right? And that to me,
Yeah.
just in 3 words, encapsulates what's made him such a tremendously successful YouTuber. And also really touches on what a lot of the psychology and science, neuroscience research and the data around creativity shows, which Dean Simonton's a researcher who did a ton of work on that. And Adam Grant really popularized a lot of Dean Simonton's work in the book Originals, with this notion that the number one determinant of creative success is output. And so it's not a question. I mean, if you look at the average number, sorry, the mode, so the most frequent output for a given producer or given creative is one, right? And that's counting everyone who even made one. There's tons of people who never even make the first thing, but the average output for anybody was one. Or not the average, the mode. They're different things statistically. But the most frequent output was one production, right? But if you looked at the creative geniuses, the people, the Mozarts, the Einsteins, the Thomas Edisons of the world, those people produced hundreds, if not thousands, of outputs, and a handful of them happen to be really successful and happen to make it and happen to turn them into highly successful masters. And so
Yeah.
that's what is so fascinating because, and oh, the other thing about that research that's really interesting is that the creative geniuses had no ability to predict in advance whether or not their creation would be a success. And so they would say, "Oh, this is going to be a masterpiece," and then produce it, and then no one would care. And then they would just create some, half baked piece of work that they kind of spent 45 minutes on and put it out, and it would end up being a masterpiece. And so even the greatest creative geniuses had almost no ability to predict whether or not what they're working on would end up being successful.
Which is crazy because it's like success is defined like by how things are received, right? I mean, like you might think this is the best thing in the world. I mean, I feel like a lot of times that happens. Music for some reason comes to mind, but you can have something that you like love, something you think is great, and then when you put it out, it's not received at all. Like, I think honestly, let us know in the comments if you've heard this song, but the song "Africa" by Toto, like everyone knows that song. Like, I bless the rains down, and
Great song.
apparently the band, I love the song. Every time it comes on, I can't help but sing along. But the band, apparently it was written about a mission trip that one of the band members had taken to Africa, and they were figuring out they had a couple more songs. They only have a certain amount on the album, and it was on the chopping block, and they were like, we're not going to do it, and they cut it. And then something happened, and they had to find a song to replace. And the guy was like, guys, come on. And they put Africa in the album. And now it's like name one other Toto song, Matt. Like no one knows
there are no other Toto songs.
But the band members were literally like, nah, like we're not, like that's great. You did your trip to Africa and you did some mission work. That's awesome. But like it's not going to make the album. And then it gets put on the album, and lo and behold, it becomes like literally the one thing that they're known for. You just never know what's going to be.
So Jennifer has a question. Jennifer, thank you for jumping into the chat. And by the way, everybody who's on here, Austin and I are kind of just riffing and hanging out, and we're going to be on here for a while, just chatting, amongst ourselves. We love to, there's no agenda for this call other than to just say hi, hang out, say what's up, and hang out with the community. And so, we love and welcome any and all questions, whether they're about the content, whether they're about the podcast, whether they're about our personal lives, if you want to dig into that stuff. We're open books pretty much. So we're, well, yeah, speak for myself, but Austin's a pretty open book. He's a chill guy. But anyway, so Jennifer has a great question, and thank you very much, Jennifer. You win a prize for asking the first question. We'll figure out what that prize is. Accolades.
T-shirt.
You never know. So what was the research we were talking about? So the core, like a lot of the fundamental research was done by a guy named Dean Keith Simonton. He wrote a book. Oh gosh, he wrote two books. One's called, I think, Origins of Genius, and I forget the name of the other one. But if you just look up Dean Keith Simonton, and then maybe if you can't find him there, just throw in the word like creativity, and you'll be able to find his stuff. He did a ton of research about eminent creators, is I think the term he uses in the research. And the interesting thing was, all the conclusions that I talked about a minute ago, but Simonton's research is brutal to get through. Like, he's love the guy. I think we even at some point tried to potentially get him on the Science of Success. But he is like, his writing and his prose and the way that stuff is written is like just not fun to read. And that's why his work just kind of languished in the towers of academia, and no one ever saw it or read it. And then this guy comes along named Adam Grant and basically took all of Simonton's research and packaged it up in a really nice, well written pop psychology kind of, pop science kind of frame in the book Originals, which became a massive sensation. And so that was that's kind of a funny story, because it shows you that there's nothing new under the sun, and like a lot of this stuff is already out there. But two, the way you frame and present things can have a massive difference on the way people receive them. But yeah, so the research, Jennifer, that you're asking about was Dean Keith Simonton's research around creativity and eminent creative producers.
It's crazy. Like, a point on there, like, this is kind of a side point of what you're saying, but like with Adam Grant, like they always say, like, that's why TED Talks, they force you to have a time limit on TED Talks, because something that's really, really difficult to do is take a complicated process or system or piece of research and make it simple. And by giving someone a time limit, it forces them to do that. And that's like a very, like, obviously the research, even in any form, is a difficult thing to do, but being able to take something that's super complex and super hard to understand and make it something that can be on a bookshelf at an airport is, like, a very valuable skill.
Yeah, totally true. Thank you, Jennifer. We appreciate the participation. And as we said, if you have questions, throw them in the chat. There's no question that we won't ask or answer. Oh, Brooke has a great question. So, how did we get on the path to this podcast? Share more about our backgrounds and how we got to this point. So, I'll give you like a 30-second of my background, and then I'll tell you the story of how I launched the show, which is a pretty long and kind of convoluted story, but there's a lot of lessons that come out of it. And weirdly, this is the second time that I've told the story today, in the context of teaching some lessons about it. So, my background, long story short, I worked on Wall Street for a number of years. Oh, nice. Now we're getting some. Now people are stop being shy, and we're starting to get some questions in the chat. I love it. Keep them flowing. Keep them flowing. So anyway, I worked on Wall Street for a number of years, and when I left Wall Street, I became a partner in an investment fund here in Nashville that does all kinds of different stuff. And since then have nice questions coming in left and right. I love it. And I've now kind of invest in, buy, sell companies, do a number of different things, have several different businesses. But the personal development, all this stuff has always been a passion of mine. It's something I've been really interested in. And I was in Puerto Rico on the beach with a friend of mine. It was one of my wife's best friends and her boyfriend at the time, and we were just sitting on the beach, and I was reading some personal development book. I think it was Start with Why by Simon Sinek. And I guess that's personal development, but close enough. And so anyway, we started talking about all these things and all these ideas and all the stuff that I thought was really important. And my buddy, the guy's name was Kevin, and he's like, hey, you should take all this stuff. He's like, I just started a company. Can you take everything, put it in a PowerPoint, and share it with my whole executive team? And I was like, sure. Like, I don't know anything about that. I mean, like, in terms of presenting it and whatever, but I've read a lot about it and feel like I could talk relatively intelligently about it for a little while. And so I did that, and it was really fun. And then I put that PowerPoint on a shelf and didn't look at it for 6 months or 9 months or whatever, and it just kind of collected dust. And I was, for some reason, telling that story to another friend of mine, who's also a previous 2 times guest on the show, Peter Shallard. Fun fact, and we've actually done a live Q&A with. But I was telling that story to Peter, and he was like, dude, why don't you take this and share it with all of your like close friends and business partners and that kind of stuff? And I was like, oh yeah, that actually is a relatively decent idea, but I was a little bit hesitant, and I hadn't done it, and I'd kind of resisted it because I was scared that people would judge me and think that I was weird for, getting into psychology and emotions and all of this stuff. And I didn't want my kind of close friends and business partners and stuff to think I was a weirdo and call me crazy and all this stuff. So that was why I was resistant to it. But then I eventually did it. Ended up sharing with a buddy of mine who owned a website at the time that was like a science news website called Red Orbit. And I don't know if we have any super OG listeners on here, but the redorbit.com was like the original sponsor of the show, and we launched on their website, and that's how we got kind of our initial traffic to go live. And the deal was that my buddy they do all the marketing, they do all the content production, they do all like the audio mastering and all that stuff, which I still to this day have no idea how to do any of that stuff, and that's part of the reason that we were struggling mightily to get the stream online, but we've gotten there. But he basically, the bargain was he'd do all the marketing, he'd do all the audio, everything, and I would just talk. And so I was like, I can talk, and so we kind of did that. We launched it, and it ended up being getting more traction than we thought it would get. We went from a couple thousand downloads to tens of thousands of downloads, and we hit new and noteworthy and all this other stuff, and started getting really excited. And so we doubled down on it. And then a couple months after that, so we launched in the fall of 2015, 4 years ago, I think fall of 2015. And then in March of 2016, my buddy sold Red Orbit and they shut the podcast down. And I lost access to the back end and like couldn't do anything. And the show basically went off the air. And I was like, oh my God, like, how do I fix this? And so I had to scramble and figure all these things out and get the show, figure out how to ultimately delegate and set up and build all of these functions and capacities on the back end, which was ultimately a huge victory, because then I learned how to systematize and process everything in the show. And to this day, I have the entire thing, from guest outreach to research to everything is really almost completely, all the audio production, everything on the back end is almost completely outsourced and delegated, and I just show up, do the shows, and that's almost the extent of my my sort of hard time commitment for the interviews. So all that to say, one of the lessons that comes out of that is, and this live stream is a great example of this, is you should always be experimenting. That's number one. And that comes back to the whole creativity thing, right? Like, I've done dozens of experiments that have failed epically, and like, just, nobody knows about them because they're in the dustbin of history or the internet or whatever. And I've had some, businesses that have failed epically too, which I've talked about on previous kind of webinars and stuff that we've done. But you never know which experiments are going to work out, right? And even the creative eminent geniuses that we talked about a minute ago don't know which experiments are ultimately going to be successful. And so we just have to keep testing experiments and see what gets traction. And so this live stream is an experiment. We don't know, it could be a disaster. You know what I mean? Like, I dumped a bottle of water all over my desk and like almost ruined my keyboard like 4 seconds before we were supposed to go live. So like, these things happen, right? But it could be a lot of fun. Like, and Austin and I just figured, like, what's the downside? Like, the downside is we look like an idiot, or I look like an idiot, and we don't do another one of these. And the upside is, like, it's a lot of fun. We get to engage. We really connect with some of the people in the audience of the show, and build some better relationships, and hopefully add some value. And so we just figured, YOLO, we'll do it, and that's it. So that's one of the big lessons. The second lesson is to embrace discomfort, right? Which we talk a lot about on the show. Is one of the very first episodes of the podcast ever, which is, life. If you want to grow and expand, all of your goals and dreams and desires are on the other side of your fear, right? And so to push through that fear, to do things that make you uncomfortable, is how you expand and how you grow. And we don't know what the hell we're doing with a live stream, but we're giving it a shot and seeing if it's any fun. And if it is, and if it works and it's cool, and we get some traction and good feedback or whatever, we might keep doing it. And if it doesn't and sucks, then we won't keep doing it. But those are two great lessons that come out of this, and also just the general history of the show. Because if I hadn't constantly been pushing myself into my discomfort zone, I don't know how to do a podcast, but I'll try it. I don't know how to create this presentation and give it to your executive team, but I'll try it. Right? All of these things. I don't want to share this with my friends and business partners, but I'll give it a shot. All of those steps, like, none of this would have happened if I hadn't taken each one of those sequentially into the unknown or into the uncomfortable. I'm gonna take a sip of water now. So we're populating with questions. I love this. Thank you, everybody, for throwing those in. Thank you, Brooke, for that question. By the way, Brooke is going to be joining us a little bit later for a hot seat, which will be really fun. Which we'll talk about in a little while and kind of explain. But that's going to be a cool experience. The next question is from Monica. She's from San Francisco. Oh, originally from Germany. Very cool. What threshold do I have for guests to be considered scientific enough? That's a good question. And Austin, I'd be curious how you weigh in on that as well. That's something I don't know that we have like a hard threshold, because honestly, we've had some guests on the show some, especially like older guests that really probably wouldn't even pass muster today. But I think that's any show as you're building up and as you're kind of coming up in the world of podcasting, you have to take the guests that you can get and kind of build up your resume and so forth. We've actually probably recorded. I mean, again, this will be a circuitous answer, but we've probably recorded at least 10, if not 10 to 15 interviews that we've never aired, just because we felt like the interview itself didn't have enough kind of evidence-based reasoning or wasn't a good enough fit. That said, I mean, we will have guests in interviews that may not be like super super scientific. We have a preference for that and probably a strong preference for it. But if the guest is awesome enough, if the content is cool enough, if we just really think it's going to add value and be really interesting, we'll still bring people on, even if they're not like a neuroscientist that has 50 published papers. But that said, the two criteria that we try to screen for in every single conversation, and we tell the guests this on the front end too, is one, we want it to be evidence based and we want to have research, data, science, et cetera, that supports it. And the second is that we want it to be action oriented. So we want to have the evidence, and then we want to figure out, what are you actually supposed to do? Like, what's the action step that you can actually implement in your life to make that a part of it. And Austin is very involved in the guest outreach and selection process too. So I'd love to hear his thoughts about this as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think Matt, you're right in the fact that there's no like set criteria. There's no fill this out and we'll see, like, is this how many like LinkedIn subscribers you have or likes you get on Facebook? I think for us, really, obviously Matt hit on the takeaways. Like, you want to be able to bring some of the audience they can start using today. And the problem really, and like what we've tried to sort of embrace, is the problem with self-help and personal development in general is it's not very scientifically like rooted in science. So if I tell you that you need to like cover yourself in honey and rub your belly and speak gibberish and you're going to get rid of your anxiety, like if you do that and your anxiety goes away, like technically like mission solved or mission accomplished. But we're trying to focus on what the evidence says will work for the most amount of people. How can you use science to actually make your life better, as opposed to relying on things that are woo-woo or may not work for you, or that are kind of rooted in really how much you believe this is going to work, versus like science says this will work. Like meditation is one of them that surprises people, and that like meditation is very backed in science. So what I tell everybody when they're talking about coming on the show is really evidence. It just has to be based on evidence. We focus on evidence-based growth. So that can mean a couple of things. That can mean that you've got research papers. That can mean that you have a book that cites a lot of research papers. Or in the case of like an FBI hostage negotiator or a spy recruiter, 30 years negotiating like hostage situations at the highest level and not losing a single one of the hostages is good experience. Like, I consider that to be evidence-based. Whatever you say, obviously you've taken it into the field and it's worked. Same things with like high performance psychologists like Michael Gervais and Dana Kavala. It's like, if you've been able to come into a team and you've been able to have them adopt certain mindsets and their physical performance is increased because of those things, and you can measure that, that's evidence-based too. It doesn't have to always be like a double-blind study with 1,000 participants.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Austin. And if you're a world champion, for example, that's probably enough evidence for us, even if you're not a scientist, right?
Right.
And people like Chris Voss or Robin Dreek or Jason Hansen are is Jason Hansen? Yeah, Jason Hansen. There's another author named Jason Harris that I'm also thinking of. But people like that who are hostage negotiators, or people who are doing things at really high stakes level, who have years and years of experience, they may not be scientists, but we still think there's a lot of value that can come out of what they've done. And so that's part of the reason that there's not a hard and fast filter, and it's a little bit of just a learning process, but that's loosely how we think about it. And Austin, you made up a kind of an interesting point earlier that I think is worth digging into just a little bit too, which is this notion of the placebo effect, right? I just recently read a book called Alchemy by Rory Sutherland, who, and this will kind of get into David's question about who are some upcoming things that we're looking at. We haven't booked him on the show yet, but he's a guest that's kind of on our radar, and he has one of the top TED Talks of all time, is one of the top 10. And his book Alchemy is really, really interesting, really cool kind of exploration of psychology and the science of marketing and all of this stuff. Anyway, all that to say, he has a whole section of the book where he talks about self-placebing, or self, I don't know exactly how to phrased it, but I think it's self-placebing.
Sounds right.
And it's fascinating how the placebo effect works. And there's all of these crazy psychology studies that talk about, oftentimes, like, I'll give you just a really quick example. Like, medicine tasting bad helps medicine be more effective, because if it tasted really good, your body wouldn't think that it was going to be as effective. And that seems kind of very weird and counterintuitive. There's all kinds of stuff like that, where if you make things harder and more difficult, at a subconscious level, that actually makes it more likely to be effective on treating you and impacting your behavior. And I'm not even that well versed in it, so I don't want to kind of extrapolate it too much more detail. But it's a fascinating topic, and the book Alchemy has a much more nuanced and intelligent discussion than I just gave you. Um, Jumping into the next question that we have on here, because now we have quite a few questions, which is awesome. David asked, "What are some of the up and coming Science of Success guests and topics?" And we touched on one earlier that Austin kind of gave you guys a hint about, that we're super super pumped. Robert Greene is We've recorded an interview with Robert Greene, so that's going to air probably next week. Tomorrow will be a guy named Michael Sorensen that's talking about listening and kind of communication strategies, and how to really hear and understand people more effectively, which pairs really well with the Oscar Trimboli interview, which you touched on earlier, Austin. And so we have Michael Sorensen coming up, and then we have Robert Greene coming up, I think, the week after that.
Yeah.
And this actually hits a little bit on your second question too, David, which we'll come back to. But one of the things that we another experiment that we've been working on at the show, that we're going to go live with next week, is we're going to start experimenting with a little bit more business specific content, and that's not going to impact in any way the current show, the current content. So we're going to continue to do one episode of the traditional Science of Success every Thursday. That will be completely unchanged. But what we're going to start doing is, our goal, and this is an experiment, this may change, this is all subject to results, research, experimentation, our various whims or whatever. But our goal is every other Tuesday to also come out with a business related episode of the podcast. And that might be less kind of core science of success, neuroscientist type of stuff, and interviewing more people that are business luminaries or people that are business experts about topics like hiring or scaling your company, or that or those kinds of things. And that may not really be well received by the audience, or it might be well received, and it might be a great additional piece of content for us to add in. We're going to experiment with it and test it. We have an interview coming out next week with a guy who's a really really smart business person that Austin and I both know personally, and has as somebody who shaped my thinking tremendously, a guy named Roland Frazier, who I don't know if any of y'all have interacted with him or come across his stuff, but his interview is coming out. We have some really cool business people coming up on the show. We haven't recorded their interviews yet, but they are scheduled, so I don't want to jinx ourselves and give away any names. So we do have some cool business people that you probably would have heard of, and we're excited about those. Austin, who else do we have kind of coming up in the pipeline? I'd have to go pull up the editorial
Yeah,
calendar.
I've got it in front of me right now. Before we go too far, though, Michael S. Sorensen. A lot of people, I think, are gonna be hearing this name for the first time, but it won't be the last time. I promise you. He released a book called "I Hear You," and it is now the #3 book on all of Amazon. Not like hacked the Amazon charts, not like found a way to get up there, but it's literally Malcolm Gladwell's new book, a book on Edward Snowden's life, and then his book. It's blowing up. So he's going to be an up and comer to watch. And one of the cool things, just a little teaser, I need, and I'll move on to kind of some of the new people, but they did a study that he analyzes, and the study's results were able to predict with 94% accuracy whether or not you would still be in a relationship with your significant other in the next 10 years. I mean, it's pretty powerful stuff. I think it was 10 years. But yeah, so we have Sorensen, Frazier, Robert Greene, Tara Swartz coming on, Swart, and she's been big. She's a big time author. We've been looking for Joe Fire. So if you want to dig into like the in and outs of podcasting at a very high level, that's an episode I would definitely recommend. They're from Evergreen Profits and the Hustle and Flowchart podcast. It's great. And then we do have an interview that we've been keeping under wraps, and maybe it's worth kind of announcing here to everybody watching. But Mihai Csikszentmihalyi
Yeah.
Is going to be airing soon. He's he is the founding father of what they call like the flow state. So those states in your life when you're just like cranking out and you just like lose track of time, or when you're so in the zone about to like go on stage or about to do something athletically. Like, how do we kind of repeat those processes and how do we get in that state more? But we've been very excited about Mihai Csikszentmihalyi for a while, which, by the way, it is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Yeah, if you've ever seen his name written out, it's actually insane how confusing it looks, and it's like 50 letters. But that interview is going to be awesome. We're excited. That was a little bit weird because how old is he now? I mean,
I think he's
75, 80.
He's pretty old, and we also caught him on like vacation with his wife at a cabin in like rural upstate New York. So
it was a little bit weird,
but it was a good one.
The Austin and the editorial team did some magic on it, so the audio is not that bad, but it was kind of weird. But we want to air it because he's literally a legend of psychology, like the guy who basically discovered flow and coined the term flow and all that stuff. And by the way, David, I'm assuming you're the David that I met maybe 6 months ago or 9 months ago or whatever when you guys were visiting town. Is that correct? I'm not 100% sure because there may be multiple David Porters, but I would be curious about that. Anyway, jumping into some of the other. What is
Maryland asked a great question, their most recent one.
Yeah. So we'll jump down. We're gonna get to all the questions that are in here, but since Austin is jumping on that one in particular, first of all, thank you so much, Marilyn, for saying that the show. Oh, David, what's up, man? Good to see you. Thanks for popping on the live stream. Hope you guys are doing well. Anyway, Marilyn, thank you for saying that the show's professional. We appreciate that. We try. We try our best. And really, Austin is kind of like the bouncer he's on all the interviews that we do, and he will jump in and rough up the guest if things are getting out of line. From a behavioral standpoint, that almost never happens. We've had one guest who, I don't know if we want to out them or not, who was such an asshole that we literally just decided not to air his interview.
Who was also at like LaGuardia getting in a cab and was like blaming us for not being satisfied with the sound quality. It was like, well, I don't know what to tell you. It's like,
yeah, he was kind of a dick, and we basically canned the interview because we didn't like him, and his work is actually really cool. So I was kind of bummed out about that.
It's unfortunate.
But it's very rare that we have to bounce somebody like mid interview. Like usually, what we'll do is we'll just record the whole thing. We definitely have guests that are difficult for a variety of reasons, not necessarily difficult in the sense of being like prickly, but difficult in the sense of their audio quality is terrible. Please out them. No, we're gonna keep their identity secret.
Yeah, because we may want to try to have him back on the show at some point later on if things cool down.
We're gonna get 10 times the size, and he's gonna ask to be on the show, and we're gonna be like, no. That's how we'll exact our revenge. But I mean, almost nobody is difficult in the sense of being like rude or prickly. We do have difficult guests. Really, some of the hardest interviews are. There's a couple things that usually for me are kind of hard interviews. One is just audio quality. So, I mean, we had like Barbara Oakley is a good example of an interview that the content is, I love the content. Yeah. The audio quality is like grating, like almost impossible to listen to. And that was an earlier episode of the show before we were kind of as vigilant about audio quality. I mean, we've probably canceled or rescheduled a half dozen at least three interviews. Just because we're like, hey, you know what? Like whatever's going on, like you're at a hotel room, you're on the road, like this audio quality is not up to par. So we're going to have to reschedule or figure something else out. So that's one, audio quality. The second one is we've had a couple guests who are some of the people who are more like luminaries of psychology who are getting in their 70s and 80s. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is one of them, quite frankly, that were just hard to do because it'd be like if you're interviewing your 85-year-old grandpa and he's never not really familiar with like the internet and all these things, it's just there's a lot of difficult parts. Like I forget who it was, and we won't name them, and it was not Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, but we had somebody who like ate a sandwich in the middle of the conversation. Or what was he doing, Austin? I forget exactly.
Oh my gosh, we could out him because it's not that bad. I'm trying to find it, but he received a phone call on a landline.
That's right.
Which was kind of strange. And he was confirming plans with friends of his to go on a double date to a burlesque show. And he was like, "Oh yeah, well we're on for the burlesque. We'll see you there. We'll meet you at Tom's house at 6 o'clock. That'd be great. That'd be great." And then he just hung up the phone and was like, "So, anyways, Matt, where were we?" And Matt and I are both just like, "Where were we? What's a burlesque show again?" Like, oh my gosh. He was Tetlock, Philip Tetlock. That's who it was.
But yeah, it's so like we've had, it's like it's stuff like that, and then the third category of guests that's hard to interview, and again, it's not them being like intentionally difficult, but it's just people who don't extrapolate or expand on their answers, and they just give these like really curt, like very short answers, and they're just like, give like a 1 sentence answer, and they're like, "Duh," and then I like ask them a follow up question to like go deeper on it, and they're like, "Yep, that's right," and then just sit, you know what I mean? And that's my job as an interviewer, is to like coax the information out of them and pull it out. But those are definitely those to me are probably the three hardest hardest types of interviews in terms of difficulty. And again, it's not them being like rude, but that's what I think about it.
And to clarify, it was not Tetlock, actually. I got that wrong. I'm trying to find it now.
I think it was, oh my God, Paul Ekman.
It was Paul Ekman.
Paul Ekman, who again is like
going to drive me nuts. He was great.
Like a legend of psychology. Like he's the guy who invented like reading faces, like body language, basically was Paul Ekman. Like all the research, all the stuff about the tribesmen and Papua New Guinea and stuff, like, and how people with different languages and who did never, all these things about how there's like 7 core emotions that you can read on anyone's face and all this stuff. Paul Ekman pioneered all that stuff, which is really fascinating.
Something that might be worth mentioning on, I'd love for you to touch on at some point, I think that everyone here would enjoy, is Commander Chris Hadfield.
Yes.
Some of the lessons there. Now we're just kind of throwing out some of the names, but I think, anyone talk about someone when you think about like evidence-based growth, like what does evidence mean? Like this guy's story is insane.
Oh yeah, and just in terms of the earlier conversation about, Chris Hadfield. So yeah, he's not a neuroscientist. He's not a psychology researcher. His work may or may not be fit the sort of rigid definition of evidence-based, but he was an astronaut who went blind during a spacewalk. So he was outside of the space shuttle, like floating around in outer space, and some kind of liquid or something got into his visor and like got into both his eyes, and he went blind in outer space. While he was like on the shuttle, like while he was out floating around in space, he went blind. And the whole story of how he overcame that and how they train that and how they deal with fear and how they overcome tough situations and stuff. I mean, that's incredible story, and so interesting. And so that's a perfect example of something that may not be directly evidence-based, but still really cool. And if you haven't checked that interview out, that one was probably a year or 2 ago, 2 years ago, but really great conversation. All right, I'm coming back to love all the questions that are popping in here. Let's see. Preston has a question. Our best favorite resource for improving negotiation and the skills associated with it. Excellent question, Preston. The starting point for negotiation, I would say there's 2 guests that we've had on in particular that I would dig into a lot of their interviews and a lot of the work around that. The first would probably be Chris Voss, who wrote the book Never Split the Difference, FBI hostage negotiator. I think he was the top international kidnapping negotiator for the FBI and did some crazy negotiations. The book is phenomenal. His interview, I think, is like one of our best interviews. I think it's still to this day one of the top, if not the most downloaded interview. If it's definitely like top 5. And it's just that was like one of our older interviews. And funnily enough, the day we recorded that, it was actually almost a year ago. Not a year. It was almost 3 years ago to the day that we recorded it, because I moved into my house on, I think it was like October 6th, 2016. I moved into my current house. And we were interviewing Chris Voss like 2 days later, and my internet still wasn't set up. And I had to like bring my whole recording setup to Austin's mom's office, because that's where we thought that there was like a space that would be like quiet enough and have like enough Wi-Fi and like all this stuff. And so the audio quality on that interview is not even that good, which really devastates me because it was such a great interview. But that was, I mean, I'm sure you remember that, Austin. And that was one in particular where it was kind of, we had to like pull it together at the very last minute, and the acoustics weren't very good. And because I didn't have any internet in my home studio. So it was kind of like, what are we going to do?
Yeah, that was definitely a heck of a day. But maybe there was something about that room. The audio quality wasn't there, but it definitely the interview performed pretty well. It also was the top article on entrepreneur.com for like 2 weeks. An article written about Chris Voss.
Yeah, that's right. He was walking through the cornfields of Iowa. That's how the interview starts. Anyway, Christian, what's up? Thanks for hopping in here. Appreciate it. Again, everybody in the chat, thank you. We love you. And I want to come back. Preston, I want to finish answering your question. So, negotiation resources. Chris Voss episode, probably the first place I'd start. Check out his book, Never Split the Difference. That's probably another place I would dig in. Second person I would check out is Kwame Christian. I think we have 2 interviews with Kwame. Is that right?
We do.
And his stuff is awesome. He's the head of the, I don't know, I'm going to butcher this, probably like the head of the American Negotiation Institute or something.
Boom.
Is that roughly correct?
I believe that is it.
And super, super, super nice guy. Austin and I actually had dinner with him. He was visiting through Nashville, and we had dinner with him a couple months ago. But he's like the nicest dude ever, and great negotiator. Tons of great resources on negotiation. So check out his stuff. Check out both of the interviews with him. That's another really good place to dig in. And then beyond that, I would say, Preston, if you haven't, and this honestly, this goes for everybody because like we put a lot of time in this, and it's an ever improving and evolving piece of the website. But if you haven't been to the Get Started page on successpodcast.com, which is just at the top, you hit Get Started, or the homepage is like a big link that says "Not sure where to get started." Click here. There's a whole section on influence and communication, which a lot of those things may not directly say negotiation, but they're really, really fundamental skills that are core components of being a successful negotiator. And a lot of there's even kind of a deep dive on some of the tactics that Chris Voss talks about and all this kind of stuff. So I would say those are some great resources to check out if you want to dig into negotiation a little bit more. Let's see. And again, as y'all have questions, thoughts, whatever, pop them into the chat. We're also going to, if we kind of get through some of the questions in the next, let's say, 10-ish minutes, sort of just depending on how things flow, we may bring Brooke in here for a hot seat. Austin, do you think that sounds good from a timing standpoint?
Yeah, I say let's do one more question and then let's jump into Brooke.
Well, there's only like 2 or 3 more. I mean, we can get through Wise's question. We can get through. I think Jennifer had another question, and then maybe 1 or 2 other questions. I think we can kind of knock through these, and then we'll get Brooke in here. And for everybody who's on a hot seat, again, we're experimenting. I mean, hot seat's kind of a format that you see in a lot of different kind of live events and stuff like this. But basically, the idea is we will bring on a listener of the show, and she in advance kind of submitted that she was willing to come on the live stream. We're going to bring her on, and she's going to pose a question to me. She sent us the question, but I haven't really had a huge amount of time to review it. But I think it'll be even more fun to kind of do it live. And then I'm just going to ask her questions about it, and we're going to kind of work through it and see if we can create some insights or some breakthroughs for her in real time, based on just some of the themes and ideas from the podcast. So we're going to be doing that hot seat with Brooke here in a couple minutes. And if anybody else is curious or interested in potentially doing a hot seat, we may have time for another one as well, or we could do one with you in a future listener Q&A. So let's see. Coming back to Wise's question, thank you very much. Oh, I guess that's not really a question. That's just a thank you. Well, thank you, Wise. I appreciate it. And if you do have a question, I'm more than happy to answer them. I really appreciate you being a fan of the show and being a listener. And I appreciate everybody for doing that as well. Let's see. Jennifer's question. How do you know if something is novel enough to take a deeper dive? That's an interesting question, Jennifer. I don't know that novelty is necessarily the marker that I use to decide whether I want to take a deeper dive on something or not. It's really more kind of either curiosity driven, so it's a topic I'm really interested in, or it's practicality driven, so it's like something that something I need to go deeper on or want to learn more about. And so creativity, for example, I did a huge deep dive on creativity last year and in 2018, and I spent almost the whole year just studying creativity, reading a bunch of authors about creativity, reading a bunch of books about it, digging into it, doing a bunch of creative exercises and brainstorming and studying all of these different things about it. And Adam Grant and Dean Simonton's work were 2 things that I came across and dug into as a result of my creative learning learning about creativity. But I would say the way that works is just anytime you find a concept or a topic that's interesting, you can usually, if you want to learn more, you can dig into it. And ironically, we talk about this in the Roland Fraser interview that's coming up in a couple days, next Tuesday. But you can start to dig into it and just peel back the layers and see, okay, well, who are they referencing, or who were their mentors, or who was inspiring their work, or what's the original research that they were talking about. And you can usually drill down and really figure out who the original kind of people are that the research is talking about. And the simplest example is a lot of these pop science books, which I'm a huge fan of. I read that kind of stuff like all the time. But a lot of these, what I'll call pop science books, which kind of originals by Adam Grant, is a great example of that. Another one that is one of the best books I've read in the last year, which is Range by David Epstein, which we had him on the show recently, and I really enjoyed our conversation. But that's another book where I read Range, which is, David is basically a journalist, but he interviewed tons and tons of researchers about all these different themes and kind of married them together under the topic of the power of multidisciplinary thinking. And I pulled probably 7 psychologists or researchers from that book that, he says, oh, I went to so and so university and talked to this researcher, and here's what they told me. And then I say, okay, well, who's that person, right? I want to go figure out. One of them, for example, that we're trying to get on the show is this guy. This actually, I don't know if he's a guy or not, but this individual named Robin Hogarth, um, who talks about the difference between wicked learning domains and kind learning domains. And that was a fascinating topic or exploration. And in the book, and one of the most interesting themes for me. So I decided, hey, I want to explore this further. Let's get Robin Hogarth on the show, which is what was something that we're working on doing now. And maybe I'll dig into. I printed out a couple of Robin's research papers and read through those and that kind of stuff. So really, I just read about their name was mentioned in a book around the topic that I was interested in, and I kept digging and digging. That said, I wanna pause for 2 seconds. Austin, how are we looking time-wise in terms of getting Brooke on here?
We're ready to roll. Brooke, I just sent you an email with a link. Be on the lookout.
And it's gonna take us a second to. This is a new piece of streaming software that we're kind of experimenting with to be able to bring in listeners like this. And so, this might take a minute, or we might not be able to actually execute it, but we're hoping that we can.
We'll get it. We'll get it.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Let me see, comb through chat, see if there's anything else in here. Christian, I'm so glad that you're a fan of the show. That I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, the impetus for the show, quite selfishly, it was just my own education. And I basically just cherry picked all the things, topics, people, etc., that I'm interested in, and and dug into that. Awesome. So Brooke, I see you. I see you in the green room. Let's see. We're gonna give us 1 second. Brooke, do you have like a set of headphones potentially? That would be super, super helpful. Um, and I'm gonna transfer the stream over. Actually, wait, this might already be live. I don't know. We'll see. We're just YOLOing this. Yes. What's up? All right, Brooke, you're live on YouTube with the Science of Success. Austin, we bumped you off the screen for now, but we still love you. Um, all right. So, Brooke, we're gonna do a hot seat. This is gonna be cool. Basically, I want you to just kind of talk about um the let's see, hold on, wait. Austin's telling me this isn't live on YouTube yet. Let me see if it's working. Okay, hold on. I think this will fix it. It takes a second. The stream's delayed a second. Um, bear with us. Let's see. Ooh, while we're getting this set up and getting Brooke live, um, I will answer John's question really quickly, which is how do we? Can't see her, but you can hear her. Interesting. Let me see. Okay. All right. It looks like everything's flowing through now. Awesome. John, I'll get back to your question after we do this hot seat. It's a good question. The easiest answer is just go to our website and click on the Get Started link, and that's a really good way to kind of dig into everything. And it's sorted by topic. Anyway, Brooke, thank you so much for coming on this hot seat, taking a leap of faith. We'll hopefully be able to create some value for you here, and I really appreciate you you jumping on and sharing whatever the kind of challenge that you're dealing with is. So give me a 30-second on or even longer than that if you take however long you'd like, honestly, but give us a high level overview of the issue that you're facing, and we'll see if we can work through it in some way.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. I listen to your podcast. It's wonderful. I've picked up
Thank you.
number of tips. You're welcome. I picked up a number of tips along the way, and I've tried to implement them. Things like removing the friction. If you're trying to, kind of create a new habit, a positive habit. So removing friction and things like that. And I can get it to work and really kind of create, new habits with the neurotransmitters, pathways in the brain and that kind of thing. I can get it to work for maybe like a week or two. And then I just kind of fall back to my old patterns. It's usually when life gets kind of stressful and things just kind of come up that you just go back to the way that you have previously known. And this really comes into play when it's self-care and my personal kind of well-being. If it's career goals or hobby goals, I can master those pretty well. I'm pretty self-driven. But when it comes to taking care of myself and removing kind of that negative self-thought, and I've gotten to the point where, I recognize those times when I have really negative thoughts about myself and I'm doing something and I go, oh, that was just dumb. That was dumb, Brooke. That was dumb. So I've gotten to the point where I recognize it, but then what next? What do I do next? So I'm kind of stuck. So if you could help kind of get me unstuck, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I have a bunch of ideas off the top of my head, and I think we can kind of dig into a couple of these, and then hopefully some of them will be potentially useful sort of solutions to this. I would say the first and maybe most important, maybe not, because it depends on, if we want to talk specifically around kind of self-talk and expectations and stuff, that's one where we can dig in. I'm super, super hard on myself, so I fully resonate and deal with the same thing. I would say, to me, the number one thing is just having self-compassion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that is like the number one starting point for dealing with any of this stuff is just being compassionate and realizing that nobody's perfect and that you're never going to like ace it 100%, right? And actually I'll give you two kind of interviews that talk a little bit about this. One, in our interview with Sebastian Marshall a couple months ago, he talks about how his sort of habit threshold is like 70% success rate, right? And he's saying if he's hitting like above 70%, he's really satisfied with that habit. So that's like a little heuristic for that. But more broadly, I don't know. Have you listened to our interview? I'll give you two interviews. Have you listened to the interview with Susan David?
When was that? Do you remember?
2-3 years ago, probably.
Maybe not.
So check out Susan David for sure.
Okay.
So Susan David interview. The other one that I would highly recommend checking out is Megan Bruno. Both of those interviews, I don't know if you've listened to that one already or not.
I have, yeah.
That one for me was like really impactful around kind of what she calls emotional perfectionism, which is basically like the notion that you always have to be in like a positive emotional state. Everything always has to be great. And Susan David is, I forget her exact credentials, but basically like, I think she's Harvard Medical School psychologist, and really, really smart. And she talks at length about self-compassion and kind of how to practice it, how to cultivate it, how to build it, and improve in your life. So like number one thing I would just say to start with is be self-compassionate and realize like it's okay to screw up, right? Like you're going to be more successful if you realize that humans are flawed and that you're going to like stumble on your journey than expecting perfection right away. And an easy kind of hack for being self-compassionate is like, what would you say to one, like your best friend or your child if they were experiencing this, right? Because we're so, we're less hard on others than we are on ourselves. So that's like a meta principle to answer this, but I want to get into more specifics. So is it like, is self-talk the primary thing, or is this part of it like carving out the time to have positive routines and rituals in your life as well?
That is a great question. I would say it's self-talk, negative self-talk, but it's also maybe carving out the time or being prepared when those just situations that are gonna come up, when they come up. Like I'll give you an example. I have a really bad Mountain Dew addiction, and I could care less about any other kind of pop but Mountain Dew. And so when something gets stressful, I immediately want a Mountain Dew, even though I know it's really awful for me. And I've set a goal every week. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to grab a Mountain Dew. And then, something happens. I'm stressed out. I'm tired, whatever it might be. And I just immediately grab a Mountain Dew. I go get a Mountain Dew. And I would run over children to go get a Mountain Dew at that point.
So we'll talk about the Mountain Dew thing specifically, and then we can get into some broader things as well. So do you keep Mountain Dew in your house?
No.
Okay. So that's good. Step one. Where do you typically find yourself going to kind of access a Mountain Dew?
A gas station nearby.
Okay. How do you get there?
Driving.
Okay. So like one thing you could do is put your keys in like a really hard to access place, or like put them in a lockbox where, like, I'll give you a specific example of this that I use for myself. Like, put them in a lockbox or give them to somebody. I don't know, do you live by yourself, or if you live with somebody else, like you could give them to another, like a roommate or a spouse or a significant other or whatever, and say, don't give these to me until I go to work tomorrow. Right.
Love it.
Or like give them to a friend. Or like just put them somewhere that's like really inconvenient to get to, and put them in a shoebox. And then on top of the shoebox, have like a printed piece of paper that says like no Mountain Dew, right? So that you have to like trigger that. And I'll give you an example of how I created some additional friction in my life to do that. I was tired of the amount of time I was spending on Instagram. And so I used the screen time app to limit myself from using Instagram. But the problem was I would just click more time, and it was I would sometimes knock out of it, but I also got this habit of just like I would just click more time without even thinking about it. And so what I did was I added in a password, and the password is like the T9 whatever letters for the word stop, right?
Nice.
So I have to type in the word stop to do it, and I also like am super resistant to ever typing that in. Like if I want to access Instagram, I'll hand the phone to my wife and say, hey, can you type in the password? It's the word stop, because I don't want to build the muscle memory of doing it, because I know if I do it too many times, I'll get familiar with it, and then I'll just do it, and then I'll have to change the password to something else, or just create like have my wife create the password and I won't even know what it is. But like those are just examples of how to kind of create more friction around that, so that you can stop yourself. But there's sort of a meta solution to this too, like even beyond just creating friction, which is I don't know if you've ever read Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg.
No.
So great book. You could probably watch like a 5-minute YouTube summary and get the key idea, which is basically he talks about, and I might be bastardizing the actual name of it, but he basically talks about this thing called the habit wheel or the habit loop. And it's cue, routine, reward, right? Those are the 3 components of any habit. So you have a cue, I'm stressed. You have a routine, Mountain Dew. You have a reward, feeling less stressed. And so the key to habit change is, and I'm vastly shrinking down like a lot of stuff they talk about in the book, but basically the key to habit change is you can't change the cue and you can't change the reward, but you can change the routine. And so can you create some kind of alternative that would be, something else you could do? Like instead of going to the gas station, you make a pot of tea, or you have a cup of coffee, or you have a glass of wine, or you have a bottle of water, or whatever that might be. Like you have to figure out a replacement routine that can still get you roughly the reward that you want. And so it might even be worthwhile to think about like, what's the actual reward that you're getting? Is it the caffeine? Is it the sweetness? Is it like the flavor? You know what I mean? Like, and think about how can you hack that? Like, can you replace that with a LaCroix that's like lemon lime LaCroix? Like it might not be as good, but I'll give you another like really quick example. You can start to kind of slowly phase something out like that. So I used to drink a pot of coffee every single day, right?
Wow.
And like a ton of caffeine. And I phased that out slowly. So I went from a pot to, 3 or 4 cups, to a couple cups, to 1 cup, and this is over like a year, I basically phased caffeine out of my life, to a cup of black tea, right, which is like less caffeine, to a cup of herbal tea, which is no caffeine, right? So then like, and now I don't drink any caffeine. Like sometimes I'll have a decaf coffee, which has technically some caffeine in it, but like I'm not drinking it for the caffeine. I'm drinking it because I like the taste of coffee, even though it's decaf, which doesn't really taste that good.
Yeah.
But all that to say, like it wasn't day one, no pots of coffee. It was like day one, it was like 90% of the amount of coffee, you know, 80% up through a year. And then that was like 3 or 4 years ago. And I haven't had, you know, now when I drink like 4 sips of regular coffee, I'm like freaking out because I've had so much caffeine. So those are a couple pieces. I would say I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you, but I think this is going to be recorded, so you can come back and watch it later too if you want. But
Thank you.
The other thing I would say is like from kind of a self-talk, from a mindfulness, like all this perspective, if you're, you know, I would like, to me, the absolute most important part of my day, and this can happen anytime during your day, but for me, it's in the morning, like first thing in the morning, I always meditate, and then I have some contemplative time to kind of write, journal, whatever. And I don't know if those practices are already kind of baked into your daily routine or not, but I would I will just ask you, do you meditate?
I have started since listening to your podcast.
I appreciate that. Have you ever done like just a really simple emotional journal, like
No.
pop open a Word doc and just write about whatever you're feeling or thinking about for like 15 minutes?
Great idea. No, I have not done that.
So that could even be a possible routine to try and sub in. So next time you feel stressed, just pop open like an Evernote or Word doc or Google Doc or whatever, and just write like, I am feeling really stressed right now because, you know, I'm dealing with my boss being an asshole, and like, you know, I'm going live on this podcast later. I don't know what they're going to ask me about, right? Like whatever. I mean, I do that stuff like multiple times a week. And I'll do it. I usually do it in the mornings to like check in, but sometimes I'll be like really pissed, or like something will trigger me emotionally, like in the middle of the workday, and I'll just pop a journal out and do like a 15-minute thing, because when you write it, it gets it out of your head and it stops like pinging around, and it's so much more effective, and it's a really great strategy for kind of just like letting some of those emotions out. And so journaling, just really simple, quick emotional journaling. Like if you do it almost a daily check-in, it's kind of like emptying all the contents out of the head. And so it's a great, you know, strategy. And then you can also do them kind of on the fly as necessary. Another routine that you could consider as a possible replacement would be doing, and I'm going to give you some like crazy ones, and you could think of your own, right? But like doing like some kind of like short burst of cardio to like completely change your physiology, because changing your physiology can massively change your mental state. Right. So like running up and down like a staircase, or like doing some jumping jacks, or like putting on, I don't know if you've ever done ecstatic dance or like heard anything about ecstatic dance. It's like,
No.
I haven't looked at the science of it, but it's a really cool way to change your state, which is basically like put on some kind of, if you just like Google or look up ecstatic dance, like you can learn more about it. But basically the idea is like you put on music and you just dance like completely ridiculously, like whatever you feel, and regardless of kind of how you know, as if nobody's watching, like you don't want, like if you were just like completely flowing to the music, and you kind of do these like goofy, ridiculous dances. But there's a somatic element to that, to releasing the kind of things that are like built up in your body, right? Because your body stores trauma and emotional responses and all this stuff. And so doing like 5 minutes of ecstatic dance, and then if you still feel like getting a Mountain Dew after the ecstatic dance, go get one. But like maybe 50% of the time you won't anymore.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Taking a cold, I mean, it may not be feasible in every scenario, but like take a cold shower for 45 seconds. Like hop on a stationary bike. We got David's throwing out the Peloton, right?
Oh yeah.
Hop on a Peloton for 5 minutes. Just like something to like disrupt your system or change the physiology could be a great way to kind of break that pattern as well. Because that's anytime you can interrupt a negative thought pattern or a negative behavior pattern, it's a really good strategy. The other thing that I would recommend is like, and I'm throwing a ton of recommendations out to you, like
This is great.
all of these may not work, but like some of them might work, or like maybe all of them will work, right? We don't know, but you got to just try stuff. The other thing that I would throw out is look up loving kindness practices. It's a certain kind of meditation where you kind of focus on like positive self-thought and all this stuff, and amplify those feelings. It's really good for improving your kind of, improving your self-compassion. And so that's another kind of practice that I would think about, just trying to implement even like once a week or a couple times a week or whatever when you're kind of experiencing these bouts of negative emotion.
Excellent. Thank you.
Is that helpful?
Very helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, do you have any other questions for me?
No, I think that does it.
Excellent. Well, Brooke, you are a champion and a hero, and a very brave individual for being the very first person that we hot seated on here. So props to you. I really appreciate it. And you know, you've got my email address. So
Yes.
and I really do respond to every single email that I get, which David knows and many other people in the chat probably know. But I really appreciate you being a listener to the show. I really appreciate you coming on this live stream, and I really appreciate putting yourself out there because it's hard and you know, I want everybody to give Brooke a round of applause, even though she can't hear anyone else clapping. But I'm really proud of you, and thank you so much for coming on here and sharing that because it's really hard, and I appreciate you doing it.
Thank you. I appreciate everything, and you keep up the great work with the podcast. They're wonderful.
Thank you, Brooke. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna go back to me and Austin, and if anybody else would like to do a hot seat, we're more than welcome to. You know, we can tee it up and set it up. Let us know in the chat if you'd like to. If not, you know, we're just gonna hang out, ask and answer any other questions that we have, and we'll keep chatting. Monica, I'm so glad that you also enjoyed Brooke's hot seat. That she's clapping for you. She's clapping for you. That's great.
Woo!
And Brooke, you're welcome to hang out in the green room, which is kind of, you guys can't see it, but it's basically just what we use to kind of prep this or whatever. Certainly no obligation to, but you're more than welcome to. Let's see. What else did Monica say in the chat? I'm so glad. Yeah. Thank you, Monica, for bearing with us for the technical difficulties. And I'm glad that you got some value out of doing the Q&A. We're going to hang out for however long until people have questions. Does anybody else have any other questions or any thoughts? You know, now would be the time to kind of get them in, because I would say, Austin, what do you want to call it in 5 minutes? If we don't have any questions, we'll wind down the stream.
Yeah, I'd like to know too, like, you know, what did you guys think about the Facebook Live, YouTube Live format? Is there anything that you'd like us to, maybe if we do another one of these and say like 2 weeks or a month, what would you want us to talk about? Maybe like we can, I mean, Matt and I can talk all day. We do talk most all day. So it's like we can go on and on and on riffing, but if there's something you guys think you would want us to really deep dive on, I'd love to know that. And also, I mean, you know, Matt at successpodcast.com, successpodcast.com. If you have any topics, ideas, things that you, I mean, even feedback, like maybe like, you know, you wear a different shirt, maybe find the background, anything at all. You know, this is our first kind of dive into this format. And I think it's something that, you know, we really want to work and we really enjoy doing, because we get to do things like what we did with Brooke right then, but we're trying to constantly get better. So if there's any feedback you guys have at all, I'd love to hear it either now or, you know, privately in my inbox or Matt's inbox. We'll share that. But that would be great to know, because I definitely love the back and forth and the live aspect of this.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. And Austin, you know, that's a great point. We welcome any and all feedback. We'd love to hear both in the chat or on email or whatever, what everybody thought of it. You know, we love doing this stuff, and you know, I really enjoy engaging and interacting with everybody in the community. And so, like, you know, bringing Brooke up on here, hopefully we created some breakthroughs for her and helped her kind of get through some challenging stuff in her life. And hopefully we helped add some value and answer everybody's questions in the chat as well. But we feed off this stuff. We love it. I mean, this is why we do the show. You know, this is why we created Science of Success. And so we love to help people and add value. And my whole mission for the show is to help people unleash their own potential and move past self-sabotage and you know, to contribute what they want to contribute to the world, and not let their own psychology and beliefs and things get in the way of them doing that. And so you know, this is an experiment, it's an idea, and it's a test to see if we can add more value and do that in different ways. And I really appreciate everybody who came on here, who asked questions, who got involved, who got engaged. and we would love to know if you want us to do more stuff like this, if you want us to do it again, if you're interested in doing a future hot seat. All of these things, just either ping us in the chat or shoot us an email or whatever. We welcome any and all of those.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny too. I was thinking when Brooke was talking about Mountain Dew, I thought about it, and like I had to Google it a little bit while you guys were talking. But do you remember Tim Ferriss, like back when he was first getting started, had this thing that he had done, and I forget what behavior he was trying to change, but it was like essentially where you would commit to donating to like an anti-charity or
Yes.
like,
Oh,
you know
yeah.
what I'm talking about?
Oh my God, Brooke, if you're still here, I see you typing in the chat. I hope you're still here. The other thing that I didn't even get a
This
chance
is
to
like
talk about
hardcore though.
is, well, you can tell. I'll let you tell the story about the anti-charity, but that's
Okay.
like a specific instance of like accountability as a whole is like one of the cornerstones of creating behavior change. And who did we have? We just had an interview 2 or 3 episodes ago where they talked all about how like the single biggest factor in creating behavior change was having other people be a part of that with you. And we've talked about that at length kind of in the past on the show and on the email list and everything.
David
But
Rock.
yeah, David Rock. Yeah. That's the David Rock episode. He talked about how whether or not you have people who are kind of committed to holding you accountable is like the single biggest determinant of whether or not you do something. So accountability, that I wrote that down and then forgot to say that because I can't read my own handwriting. But so that's another element too to look at for you, Brooke, is to think about, is there a way to cultivate or create accountability somehow around that? Whether it's making a commitment to somebody, whether it's using an anti-charity, which Austin can tell you about in a second, or whether it's having like a buddy system where you have another friend with with some kind of habit and you're both trying to break it and you hold each other accountable in some way. You can get kind of creative about it, but Austin, tell her about how an anti-charity could be kind of an element or a way to create accountability around this.
So I preface this, I'm not a doctor, nor do we pretend to be one on the internet. I think that's what Matt used to say, or sorry, Tim used to say. But there was, for those that are like super hardcore about it, Tim Ferriss had this hack that he had used in the past, and it was essentially like, tell yourself you're going to do something, and there's websites that facilitate this too for this specific use, but I think it's called Stick with 2 Ks.
Yep.
But it's like you can go in and basically set, and there's an accountability element to it, to where like I would say, okay, I'm not going to drink a Mountain Dew for 30 days. Matt's like my best friend, sees me all the time. He's linked to my account and actually controls my account. So like what I would say is I would commit to donating like $50 to a charity or a cause that I don't believe in at all. And if I mess it up, Matt clicks a button and he's my accountability buddy that then donates in my name. So I'm a visible donor to this charity. So like, for instance, I forget what charity Tim used, but it's like, there's a list of, there's some pretty crazy organizations out there, like it's depending on your beliefs, it might be a different one. I don't want to like assume anything and give anybody a wrong one, but basically like you will be listed on the donors list of this charity publicly if you give them money. And so like it's dual accountability because I'm having Matt hold me accountable for not doing this, but at the same time I have to hold Matt accountable to not let me be like, yo, Matt, I had a Mountain Dew, please don't donate that money. Like he has to be a good enough friend of mine and like actually want me to succeed to force me to go through the pain of having my name listed on that website or as a donor by like, going through with it if I actually don't do what I'm saying. But that was a big one for Tim and a lot of his friends, I remember, because believe me, like views change. I've made some donations in the past, certain places. I still get emails and I'm like, golly, like, well, I can't get that $20 back. But it's just a great way to remind yourself, like if I don't do this, there's actually consequences that aren't just going to affect me, because I can always let me slip, but like Matt will know, and anyone who goes look at that donor list will know and then peg me as something that I don't believe I am if I do this. So just like, that's a pretty hardcore one, but it's there if you're really wanting to try to force behavior change. There's also that Pavlov wristband that we messed with that one time. I don't know if I would recommend that one, but that was I think Nathan Maggard, our buddy, definitely used that to like try to influence some of his
yeah, so Pavlov, they've really been blowing up. Actually, I'm buddies with the founder of that company, a guy named Manish, and that's a really interesting one as well to kind of look at from a behavior change standpoint. It's basically like a bracelet where you you can either shock yourself or have somebody else shock you if you perform a behavior that you don't want to perform. And it's I think they've actually had some huge effectiveness in two things primarily. One of them smoking cessation, so like getting yourself to stop smoking, and the other one is waking up. And people who are chronic snoozers, apparently it's like a massive, I think they call it like the shot clock, and it's just like a massive massively useful tool for people who really sleep in. So Manish, you're getting a plug, buddy. I expect a commission on that. No, I'm just kidding.
You will not sleep through this. I can guarantee you. As someone who
That's
thought
literally their promise, is like the alarm clock. You can't sleep through.
As someone who really thought it'd be funny to put on a friend of mine's and let them shock me, and then immediately regretted it, you're not going to sleep through it. And if you're sleeping with someone else, they're not going to sleep through you not sleeping through it either for the first couple of weeks easily.
That's right.
There's a couple of tips.
And I think the meta lesson, again, I really want to shout out to Brooke, because it took a lot of courage to come on here, and without any expectation of what was going to happen, to bare her soul and share some of her own challenges. And so again, props to her. But I think the meta lesson from this too is like there's always more ideas, angles, solutions, strategies, etc., that you may not have thought of, that can help you with any challenge that you're dealing with in your life. And that's why I love kind of doing hot seats and stuff like that, because like the way my brain works is I literally listed out like 7. You can't probably read my extreme chicken scratch handwriting, but like I came up with like all these different solutions and ideas, and it was just like, hey, you could try this, you could try this, you could do this, and there's always more ideas and solutions to something that you're dealing with, or ways that you could solve it that you may not have thought of. John, thanks for coming on here. We appreciate it, and I'm glad you got a lot out of this, and hope to see you on a future Q&A. With that said, it's 3 minutes to the hour. I haven't seen any new questions pop in, so we are going to call it in 3 minutes. But Austin and I are just going to kind of talk incessantly to each other until that 3 minutes are up, to give you any last opportunities to fire some questions in. But I really would love to say thank you to everybody. I've had a lot of fun doing this. I had a great time. Thank you, especially to Brooke, for popping in the hot seat. Thank you everybody who asked questions, some really cool questions, some great discussions. We got a little bit of show information, kind of some behind the scenes. We got some cool deep dives into creativity and some other topics. And so this was a lot of fun. This was really cool. And I hope to do some more of these. I hope to do these in the future. I'd love to get on some kind of regular cadence of doing these with some sort of regularity. And if nothing else, it was a lot of fun. Hopefully we created some value and really helped a couple people out there who are listening and watching this. And so thank you to everyone for being a listener of the show. Thank you for being such a great part of our community. We really appreciate and love everybody in the community. And we're doing this for all of you. So we hope that you love the show. We hope that you got some value out of this live stream. And I really, again, just want to say thank you.
Nice. I think that's a good one to end on, man.
All right. Thanks, everybody. You rock. Science of Success team.
Whoop, whoop.
Signing out.
Adios. Godspeed.